Colors.
Yeah, so these are Panamanian molas.
They're what? Wait,
Yeah,
what
so
are they?
they're called molas. And
Molas.
my mom, she's Puerto
Isn't
Rican.
that kind of some kind of fish?
I have no idea. I don't think
Show 'em over here, too.
Pescado is the word I know for fish, but my mom grew up in the Panama Canal Zone. Her father was in the Air Force, and so she was born on an Air Force base that no longer exists in the Panama Canal Zone.
Oh.
And so these come from Panama, and these are two of the ones that I inherited. I just learned by reading the back that she gifted one to somebody named Debbie in 1985, and I somehow ended up with it. But this one is supposed to depict the gods of the directions, so like north, south, east, west. I don't know what this one is intended to depict, but I just like the pretty colors. And they're fabric, so
Oh, it's
Are
fabric.
they-
they're fabric, that's why they catch the dog
Are
hair.
they embroidered?
I think
Yeah, it looks
so.
embroidered good.
And you can touch them if you're not
Oh,
allergic to
yeah.
dog hair. They're kind of like textured.
Oh,
And-
interesting.
Thank you.
They're called, it's MOLA. They're made by the natives in Panama. Share.
This is, we have
So mean.
a special relationship.
I remember in
No.
Guatemala, the sacredness of the directions, you know,
Yeah.
north, south, east, praying to each direction.
Yeah,
Really
so
important.
that one is meant to kind of
I like
like
the brand,
depict the directions, and that
It's a
was
little
one
brand
that
on the side.
they have like a spiritual representative for each direction. And I think you see a similar thing in Japan where you have like the god of the north gate, south gate, east gate. So it's interesting that a lot of cultures have that.
What just makes you realize like so much of our like, you know, Google Earth and all of that is kind of still trying to get a
Yeah.
sense
Like the
of location, who we are and where you are.
Right. And on the back of this small one is actually the name of the native tribe that made that particular mola. It's
So this is kind of the name of the tradition, the Mola
the
tradition.
mola is just the name of the style of art, yeah. So they have different ones. My mom has others, but these are the two that I kind of inherited from her.
I can't tell how they're made.
I have no idea.
I know.
I mean, there's some stitching, I think, I see stitching
Yeah.
here. So they cut away, but then they.
And you can see like the stitches
Make sure you
here.
get some water.
That's where it's
So the
just
stitches along the back edge,
like
and
that.
other things are like behind.
I think they take like a sharp thing and they cut out
Yeah.
pieces of the fabric to create that texture.
And then to expose something in the back, put more fabric or
And
something.
I think
Oh,
if you took the back out, you probably see like the stitches on the
Nobody has
back,
missed
but
it.
they're the
Hey, we're the best of life.
Huna Indians, which she called them in 1985. So I don't know what they're, the Huna is just the name of the tribe. But yeah, this one was made on San Blas Island.
So it's still on my radar.
So those are neat, thanks.
Yeah.
I've never seen any, I've never seen any.
Right.
It's just sort of mine and.
Yeah, a little bit,
Yeah.
a little bit.
But
No, that's definitely still on my radar.
I'm not sure exactly what this one portrays. I remember that one is the directions of like north,
so
south.
neat, kind of like a duck, but then
Yeah.
it could be a
A
chicken.
new position.
Because those also have like bird features.
So learning designer.
And most of the
for
bolas
public-
that I've seen,
public
they do
health.
have like bird
So it's
features
part
that
of
they're
her
representing.
office,
So this most
education
likely represents some
technology
kind of
assessment.
deity.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's basically
Right.
working with faculty to
A tribe.
enhance
And,
their
Panama.
curriculum and
So
building
you can,
more, you know, engaging.
she got them,
Public
she
health
lived in
is
Panama,
certainly
so
on
she was
everybody's
born
mind.
on, I
So
think
it's a
her first
pretty
name
easy
is
place to kind of
Aldrich.
move into,
Yeah,
yes.
it's something that
I don't remember the name of the
we
Air
all
Force
take
base, but it was an Air Force
amazingly
base.
for granted
Right.
until
And she grew up there,
Yeah.
and
Something
so
happens,
these
you
were made
realize
by some of the native
how dependent
Panamanians
we
who were
are
called
on the
Molas.
system that brings us food.
It actually still has like the stamp on the back with the like made in Panama on it. Yeah.
It is a fish too, it's an ocean sunfish.
Oh, okay, I've never heard that before.
Alright, so let's get going. Thank you, you were wonderful. I'm really impressed by your sermon today, that's the title of it. And,
Thank you.
so keep it going doing that. And the rain, how about that rain this morning? I thought,
Right,
oh wow,
yeah.
I have never heard so much rain in my life. Maybe I was just sleeping and I was just dying. It was just, and it stopped and then started again. So anyways, we're talking about Cuba again, a kind of godless revolutionary time in Cuba. And it's an interesting time to think about kind of what role, you know, religion plays in the modern era. And of course, you know, in a socialist state, religion is kind of seen as competitive with the state, which is unfortunate. And so it's an interesting thing to think about when it comes to like, you know, what role does the state play, separation of church and state, what role does an artist kind of play in the state, and of course Cuba, you've got this particular situation with paranoia because of the Cold War and all that. Now I can't really put it all into one completely comprehensive, thorough thing, but I wanted to focus on the 1980s because that's when you have this generation of Cubans raised under the revolution who are the kind of the representatives of the Cuban Revolution. And we can take a look at their art. One in particular, Antonia Itis, I think is a really good character to focus, artist to focus on because she goes through a lot of the what we might call the kind of expected conflicts you might see with art and socialism in Cuba. So we'll kind of focus on her. But of course, keep in mind, Cuba is, I think, about to enter probably by the end of this, if not this year, the end of the decade, you'll hear that Cuba is either like a new capitalist nation or hopefully not, you know, it's nothing bad. But I do think Cuba needs to kind of transform for the next era. So I think it's an interesting time to talk about Cuba. So I hope you appreciate this. So let's not start here so much, but we'll get back to this one. This is a famous painting from the 1970s. You notice the title? Maybe we'll focus on this one.
Yeah.
All you need is love.
And what is that reference?
Beatles, the
It's
Beatles.
the famous song by the Monkees, of course.
Oh, yeah, Last Train to Clarksville, I see.
I bet that Beatles must have hated the Monkees, right? Probably.
Well, the
right?
Monkeys were contrived to
Yeah, they were
be
good.
the Beatles.
They were like the American Beatles.
Yeah. Or they
So,
were trying.
you know, it's a reference to the Beatles song. What was it? All You Need Is Love. What was it? Abbey Road, I think. And an unexpected title in Cuba, because of course, you know, Cuba, you would expect them to have only disdain for anything capitalistic. So again, I think this is the artist kind of struggling with, you know, what is, and that is, I think, the real question, what is socialist art? What is Cuban art? What is art fitting for this Cuban socialist revolution? So we'll get back to this one in a moment, but, you know, does anyone see anything that's overtly political here, or anything socialist, or Christian or anything?
No.
It's kind of like, well, what do we see? What are we looking at?
It looks like a picture.
Yeah,
It
picture.
looks like a
Yeah,
photograph.
A photograph, like someone, a very
The
contemporary
details,
feeling, almost
yes.
like someone like lovers, like sitting in the grass,
Yeah.
removed from
Yeah.
all adversities in the world.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like this is a person who's completely as far away from the revolution as possible. And for me, that's a big no-no in Cuba, you know? So that, I think that's really a fascinating thing. So you take this, like, and yet how can you criticize this? How could what society could criticize this most? This is not political enough, you know what I mean? So I think that's really, what the artist is doing here is trying to say, like, let me get away from kind of the politics and kind of have a moment. And, you know, this could be like a spiritual moment. This could be a moment of transcendence, but it's certainly not, you know, in this country, this would be a moment away from Trump, or a moment away from Obama, or a moment away from politics, just sort of free from but of course, once you post this online on social media, it's no longer this moment, right? So it's, you know, it's really this is not a social media moment, this is just like an authentic moment of two people sharing a moment, and we're meant to see that and appreciate that innocence, I think, and I think that's the idea. But of course, when you insert politics into this, that's when it gets, you know, another layer of meaningfulness. And I think the question for a lot of these Cuban artists is, you know, what is their role in Cuba, of course, and what is their kind of obligation to the countries, let me get ahead, a little further ahead, so to kind of the system. Because, you know, in the United States, it's not like you have to serve the administration if you're an artist, or serve capitalism, you're just do whatever you want as an artist. So, you know, we might hold our Cuban artists to a different standard because maybe, you know, Fidel Castro certainly will. So Fidel, you know, famously makes a speech. You know, Fidel Castro is like Mike Tyson. He has a very high-pitched voice. He speaks very high-pitched. And he's really unexpected. If you know Mike Tyson, likewise, has a very high-pitched voice. I wouldn't do that in front of him.
You do it
Within the
once.
revolution, everything. Against the revolution, nothing. You know, that's really kind of a comment on culture. And, you know, the older I get, the more I kind of think that, you know, everything is downstream from culture. And I think the United States is kind of dealing with a cultural crisis right now because on one hand, people see the United States as kind of this empty vessel, and, you know, filled up with stuff from all over the world. Or you could say, well, there is a kind of American culture that we should kind of stand up for. And I think there's a kind of tension between those two. And if I think about American culture, I can't separate it from Christianity. I can't separate it from free will and from kind of individual rights, because God is in each one of us. Then we each have rights and we each have a sense of importance and value. But if you say, oh no, the socialist state is kind of the thing that gives you value, that's a very different kind of mindset. So it's got to be a very strange thing to be an artist in a system where you have this kind of obligation to the revolution. And I think even artists in this country, I remember in college, like going from, oh, let me paint pictures to, I have to make something that's like a message. It needs to be a message. And that can be kind of good, but also paralyzing sometimes. So, the question I think you have to think about is within the revolution, outside the revolution. So first, let's give you a little context of what's going on in the United States. We've got pop art, which remember we saw a little bit from, I think you guys know about pop art, Andy Warhol. And Pollock we saw with the Mexican Muralist movement. And then you have this kind of found art that's Rauschenberg, ready-made, everyday item, fine. And does any of these feel like fitting for socialist, revolutionary? You think Fidel Castro, if you had to pick one of the three, he's like, oh yeah, that's it. That's the one. That's going to be the real vehicle. So I think you can see the problem with, in the United States, we have a kind of like novelty for novelty's sake, originality for originality's sake, push the boundaries, but it's not just in service of capitalism, or in service, to a degree it is, but it's really kind of like exploration, free exploration. And that's not necessarily something, in a socialist society, it's all supposed to be kind of about the message. So, this is something that artists in Cuba will be well aware of, like, Andy Warhol painted by, or Marilyn Monroe painted by Andy Warhol. And it's more than just Andy Warhol. I mean, Marilyn Monroe, it's actually a comment on her death. She died, and it's just kind of her life and death. So it's a very simple way of reducing this type of style to kind of some kind of, social commentary about her life and death. But then when you do it to Mao Zedong, it's very different. This is the communist leader in China. And do you think Mao Zedong, I don't know very much about Mao Zedong, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that he looked at this and was not very happy about this. Same with, I think, do this for Putin, do this for any leader, Trump, Biden, but I think Fidel Castro especially would be like, no, this is not, don't put lipstick on me and it looks like lipstick, right? So this is,
Eyeshadow.
What's that?
Eyeshadow.
Eyeshadow, little blush. Yeah, so I think there's a kind of mockery, there's a kind of, it reveals how much these figures are elevated on the pedestal. And here in this country, it's all about iconoclasm, knock them down, nothing. You criticize it, satire is kind of part of American culture, but of course in the socialist society, everyone's walking on eggshells, right? So, I think lampooning Mao Zedong in a way is what's going on here, but now we have a Cuban version. This is Jose Marti, and really synonymous with Cuban independence and a very noble figure. And I think you feel here it's not satirical anymore. Now it's kind of like, we're venerating this figure, maybe his mustache is a little ridiculous, but...
Well, it almost looks like stained glass.
Yeah, it does. So, and it has that quality, religious quality of... Yeah, because even though we're repeating the figure, it feels still like it's not kind of now cartoony. It feels like we've shifted the focus to more, oh, it's good, rather than it's just a repetitive, superficial Marilyn Monroe. So it is interesting how the Cuban artists are filtering it into something a little more deep, or something... And of course, here's Fidel Castro. And again, it's not, I think there's something cartoony about it, but it's still celebrating Fidel.
Who did this one?
It's like, this is by...
The same
person?
person?
Raul Martinez, yeah, I think it's the same guy,
okay.
yeah. So now this Raul Martinez was born before the revolution. So I'm just kind of setting this up as he's not the one who was kind of the byproduct of the revolution. He's the one who sort of tries to bridge and reconcile he's saying, let's be relevant and show that pop art has some relevance in Cuba. Kind of missing the whole point though, Andy Warhol, I think, to a degree, or intentionally missing the point. And this is another example using that Rauschenberg style, ready-made, found art. And while I love this doesn't survive the internet generation for some reason. This kind of stuff doesn't have enough, people have enough attention span or subtlety for this kind of thing. Like the internet's all about object.
Well, how does it look this big?
Yeah, and it's all very small and everything. So the internet kind of irons everything out into this pixels and photons, and it's not the same. That's not pixels and photons. It's a real. Anyway, I'm just making an aside about kind of the art world today. But this again is not really socialist art, right? It's not really fitting for socialism. So what I think they're trying to do is put a round peg into a square hole, trying to politicize this very, and even Rauschenberg, this is actually Rauschenberg's work, trying to kind of use this style to talk about Kennedy's assassination. You know, I think we'll do this, that, and the other thing, we'll go to the moon. Thank you. And so here is Antonia Itis. So this is the artist we're going to look at today, or at least one of the artists. So she paints this in 1968, very under 10 years after the revolution in 1959. So what do you think about? Any comments on this? Definitely close enough to the revolution where you're, you know, still in that kind of revolutionary fervor.
I can't tell what the little tag, what the colored tags say.
Yeah, so what's going on is that's kind of just like a velvet rope. It's a reference to, it says por una paz democrática, or democracia, they said democrática. So it's kind of just a reference to, I think, velvet rope and exclusivity. I think it's technically a reference to something going on at the time, but I think you can kind of ignore that as sort of like, the velvet rope is, I think, the key thing to focus on, just saying there's a separation between the speaker and the audience. And of course, it's kind of playing with this idea of, you know, microphone, Fidel Castro, who has the right to speak into the microphone. And any comments about this? Do you think Fidel Castro would have liked this?
Probably.
Probably yes or no?
I think so, because what it's showing is like, look at this superiority that Democratic viewpoint looks at you as less than.
Okay,
And
great.
we've separated the Democratic speaker from the people in a very like blatant way.
And are the people, like, would you say that's
Almost
good,
faceless.
bad,
Their
Well,
faces.
they're almost faceless.
Like-
faceless, kind of masses, right?
Yeah, like
Yeah, so-
most of them are just shapes.
Yeah, and they're black and white, there's not many, there's just two.
There's no speaker.
Yeah, and there's no speaker, so you're kind of like, well, who is speaking?
Yeah,
Are
it's
we
almost like-
standing there? And I think what's so cool about this is why I love art is it's kind of intentionally vague. It's like, and I think on one hand because she's like, I don't want to get in trouble, but also
Yeah.
this is way more interesting. Like if I post something online today, if you're an artist, you kind of want to like not upset anyone, but you also want it to be, you know, meaningful. So the best one solution is to like, this can be taken either way. You know what I mean? I either interpret it this way or that way, and you're safe in that kind of like uncertainty. So she gets in big trouble for this. She gets kind of like quietly removed from the kind of art world because, well, when they don't totally go into the reasons, but so you can see the painting was exhibited at the National Salon, blah, 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 blah. He considered the work to be grotesque and defeatist. I love that word, defeatist. In essence, counter-revolutionary. The painting, the revolution's populist crowd is transformed by the painter into a common herd, a mob of grotesqueries to be manipulated by the speaker to do his bidding. And of course, it's just one person's interpretation.
Yeah, sure.
The empty and awaiting podium makes the absence of the demagogue a powerful presence in reverse. So that's kind of, I guess, the nature of the criticism of it, at least. But again, it's not like this is right or wrong. It's really more an opportunistic person can come along at any point and use the sort of revolutionary rhetoric to kind of, oh, you are a heretic. You are disobeying the kind of the socialist speak, the right speak. And so she kind of gets quietly removed from kind of public support, you know. And so she starts giving classes to kids and as kind of like a, here, let me put you out to pasture kind of thing. And only in 1989 is she awarded this Felix Varela Award, which is kind of the big cultural award in Cuba, but it's kind of like many years too late. So we'll kind of get back to her in a moment and kind of see how this unfolds in the 70s, because of course the 1970s is when a lot of this is kind of, a lot of these artists have to kind of come of age in the revolution, and a lot of them embrace conceptual art because it is kind of a safe space that's free from all of the minefield, which is kind of like subject matter. So, you know, something like this, for instance, a photograph of the revolutionary family. Could Fidel Castro criticize this? It's very hard to criticize this because look, everyone's a good socialist. So, you know, I've just got to point out these artistic strategies in revolutionary Cuba are very interesting because, you know, this is like almost ironic. It's like, look at how happy we all are supporting the revolution. It's almost like they're really saying, yeah, you go ahead and Antonia Itis me. There's no way you can do that because this is all pro-revolution. So it's almost like they're reacting to this with something like this. Like, yeah, we're all like fully on board. And, you know, we have Ana Mendieta, who's an artist who visits Cuba. She was one of the Cuban artists who went into exile. She's a very interesting subject because she actually got pushed out of, well, there's a lot of controversy, but she might have gotten pushed out the window by her husband, Carl
You talked
Andre.
about her, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he's a very famous artist. The whole art world kind of rallied around him, and I think there still needs to be a movie made about Ana Mendieta, but I might save her for another summer of classes if we do this again. So there she is in the middle, right there, among all these Cuban artists, and it just shows the love that they have for her, and a real communal sense of kindred connection and kinship between all these artists, which does, I think, speak to Cuba having kind of a little bit of a kind of socialist, communal kind of approach to life. And of course, the death of Che is kind of like the death of, I don't know, Lincoln, assassination of a major figure. And so Raul Martinez, the artist we saw a moment ago, continues to kind of use the Che as a kind of icon exporting the revolution. And he's kind of got a Jesus Christ-like quality to him in the sense that he dies fighting for the revolution. But of course, the problem that makes him not Jesus Christ-like is violence. Violence is such a dangerous thing because it begets violence. The whole cycle of violence is unstoppable kind of until Athena or justice intervenes and says, wait, let's weigh each side, and that's of course free will is really the basis of our system of justice, and I think that's so important. But of course violence is so bad as a kind of standard because if you live by the sword, you die by the sword, right? And what happened to him? Died by the sword. He tried to go to Africa to promote revolution, and people were like, wait, you're gonna stand out like a sore thumb. So he went to Bolivia, and then his asthma is what got him in trouble because he couldn't have asthma. I think he couldn't breathe at one point, and they captured him. Very interesting dialogue between him, apparently, and the Bolivians who captured him. But that's something for another day. But he's kind of a martyr for Cuban independence or the Cuban Revolution. You see a lot of these posters from this period, the exporting revolution. I don't want to go into these too much, just to kind of show them using this kind of poster art form as a way to galvanize the revolution. And this kind of becomes, using nationalism and patriotism in the 1980s, but safely hiding behind the kind of patriotism as a way to make art without it offending anyone. But there's this really strident anti-American kind of propaganda in Cuba. You see a lot of billboards all over Cuba with Martí and Fidel kind of criticizing the United States all over the place. And now they kind of read almost as kind of like out of touch with reality because, of course, Cuba's crumbling. In Africa, there's a lot of support for Cuba because Cuba intervened in Angola, which was fighting against South Africa. And I think that there were some good qualities to that because they stood up against South Africa and apartheid, and Angola's and Cuba have a long connection and kind of, I think, solidarity between the two. But in Cuba, like many countries, they're dealing with homosexuality, women's rights, and all kinds of things in the 1970s. And in Cuba, in many cases, they imprisoned gays or literally made them leave the country. And I think that's true. It's the United States, we have that too, but I think it's a little more heightened in a socialist state where, again, everything is within the revolution. Now, some people who are more romantic about Cuba will talk about women's rights, and there's a law in Cuba that says men have to do half the housework kind of thing, and they'll say that, look at how great Cuba is, because we have this law that says men have to do half the housework. Doesn't mean they're going to do it just because it's written in the law. But there's a lot of, some people will really focus on the positives about Cuba, others will focus on the negative, and of course the truth is somewhere in the middle. But sadly, I think Cuba only has kind of one generation of artists who really kind of are the representatives of this revolution, because very quickly it will fade into the collapse of Cuba after the Soviet Union's collapse. And so you really only have one generation of Cuban artists who are the generation that kind of shows kind of the value of Cuban art, and who knows what will happen in the next few decades, but most Cuban artists, they live in Florida right now. So let's go ahead. Okay, so here's Antonia Itis. So here she is in like 1929 and 1995 she died. And yeah, in 1954, in defiance of the institution's academicism, Iris enrolled in the Grupo de 11. So she's kind of part of this vanguard of artists at the beginning of the revolution, and here's some more of her work. And I don't think it's, well, what do you guys think? Not very flattering, right?
No.
But of course, there's a place for kind of the scream, right? Edvard Munch, or, it's not like, Hitler wouldn't like this, right? Hitler would not say like, oh, this is Nazi Germany. No, in a way, it's kind of like, I see this as kind of like, this is how maybe one side of human nature, there's an ugly side to us, there's a beautiful side to us, and just because you're showing the ugly side to us doesn't mean that we're ugly. It means there's an ugliness that we should be aware of, right? So, and this is, 1963, 4 years after the revolution.
Well, it's funny, cause the title is
My partner.
Mi compañeras,
Yeah,
which
my
are
partner is
friends.
my friend.
Compañeras are your, yeah.
Right, and I think that's meant to
That's
be
your
ironic.
posse, that's your,
Right,
that's your
I
group.
think that's meant to be ironic, kind of like, these are my people, and this is kind of and I think it's kind of meant to be like, okay, the people around me are all kind of like, what's the word in Cuba, pardon the French, but puteria, kind of horror, like a whorehouse. A lot of Cubans will say like, oh, they're socialists, watch out for them, meaning they steal from you. Or the puteria of socialism, that kind of everyone's kind of becomes kind of pardon my French, like a prostitute in a system like that where you kind of have to sell, constantly be selling. And so I think she's kind of commenting on the masses, kind of the masses in Cuba, or maybe it's not, maybe it's kind of just kind of her style. But I think you can see even something like this is an annunciation. Now we're going to the moment where the Virgin Mary, who Gabriel goes to the Virgin Mary, and he says, "You're pregnant with Jesus," so it's Annunciation is a very powerful moment in Catholicism and Christianity where the Virgin Mary is kind of told she's pregnant. Now, of course, we're in Cuba, and what do you see here? Is this kind of a flattering portrayal of the Annunciation?
Scary.
Yeah, it's kind of nightmarish.
It's horror-ish and.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is, I don't know if this relates.
Skeleton?
Yeah, it
It
looks
looks
kind of like
like
skeletal
death.
Gabriel.
So
It
Gabriel's
kind of
not
reminds me of
like
like a Basquiat painting, even that little crown that you see
Yeah.
above Basquiat, a lot of his heads. But you gotta wonder, and there's like a film, it looks like a
Yeah, I was
film
gonna say,
projector.
what is that thing there?
It looks like a film projector, I don't know, but I do think there's a real critique of Cuba here, or maybe Cuba, I don't know exactly the nature of it, or the kind of the source of it, but I do think he's kind of using she's using Christianity to kind of criticize Cuba, maybe like kind of socialism is kind of giving birth to socialism is like a nightmarish version of it, I don't know, but definitely Christian imagery, right? And I think that's exactly probably why she's pushing, she's very kind of brave and almost like insane, because
Yeah.
we're gonna get in trouble. And another example, mis vecinos, my neighbors, again, not a very flattering picture. Now, you have to understand, in Cuba, for many decades, probably in the 1990s, people, there were like all these brigades of like, are you being revolutionary? We're gonna turn you in, homosexuals, different. So I think she's capturing that kind of paranoia in the sense that in socialist state, people kind of turn against each other. And these are more found art perhaps, so she's definitely exploring different things. But I love this, nothing really wonderful about these, that's so expressive, and you don't see this with that first generation in the 1980s, and this, all these works culminate with this one in 1968, so I think it does seem to be an unflattering portrayal of kind of Cuba as a sort of maybe an audience of, without much, dimension and individuality or nuance, but I think it's in a place of open to interpretation. The Velvet Rope kind of implies separation from, the hierarchy, and kind of at eye level them, but I think this is the painting that got her into a lot of trouble. He considered the work, just defeatist, and so I think what happens, a lot of these artists afterwards, including this, are like, okay, let's not do any Antonianitis or else we're gonna go to jail, or get in trouble. So a lot of artists focus on concept art, childhood, Afro-Cuban religion, performance, and try to be kind of internationally relevant because, of course, Cuban government wants to show off how amazing these artists are from the 1980s. So I'm gonna skip ahead to some stuff that's not so relevant. So the Volumen Uno is actually referenced, that's the name of their movement. It's a reference to Led Zeppelin, so it kind of shows you they're trying to kind of be relevant on the world stage with some pop culture. So there's no place to exhibit. So it was the Administrator of Interior who got a gallery, so they have to find a place to exhibit their art because it's, where do you exhibit in a socialist state? There's a state-sponsored galleries, and so that's kind of, this is the nature of the problem in the 1980s. And the government will realize, we want these artists to become these symbols of greatness in Cuba because there's this trend in Cuba of people leaving. Mariel Boatlift, Peter Pan, Balsero crisis. So a lot of Cubans are just leaving, and Fidel Castro wants to show off, okay, no, we're worthy. Cuban Revolution has great art. So that's really where these artists kind of come in because they want to show off this generation of artists in the 1980s. And here's, Garciandia, and I'll let you kind of come up with your own thoughts on what's going on here. but just kind of showing this is that first wave of artists in the 1980s who've really been trained by the revolution, who are kind of the representatives of the revolution, and they're kind of offering this kind of art as that first wave of kind of authentic art. So you can see hammers and sickles, but it feels very kind of like apolitical. I don't know if it does to you. Maybe the hammers and sickles not so much, but it feels kind of like vague, it's kind of sexual here.
Yeah.
Now the main point to keep in mind is every one of these artists that we're looking at are now in the United States or Mexico by choice, because they were like, there's no future in Cuba. So it's really kind of a sad moment. They all literally burned their boat because all of these artists come to the United States because they just don't see a future in Cuba. This is Joe Bedia. He's big in Miami. You'll see him all over the place. This is his work. This is with Fredo Lam, who looked at, and it's Joe Bedia. So he's channeling a lot of the Afro-Cuban tradition. Here's some more examples. And this kind of reminds you of the Mola. It's kind of a richly kind of folkloric and or Afro-Cuban, and certainly Cuban. He leaves Cuba in 1993. Maybe next summer we're talking about Cuba, because the Soviet Union collapsed. And so he's now in Miami, and he's very visible in Miami. You see his work all over the place, in various formats, as you see. Looks like a church, or at least some
Stations of the Cross.
Yeah. What's that?
I think those are the Stations of the Cross.
That's what it looks like.
Oh, yeah,
They look
right.
like that.
Very good. Good eyes. Very good. And it looks like, was that a manatee or a
Manatee.
stingray? A leopard ray? Manta ray.
Yeah.
Those leopard rays are amazing. Have you seen them? But yeah, it's neat to see him kind of translate his work to the United States. And it must be interesting, kind of like Europeans coming to visit the United States during the World Cup. They haven't really checked in on us since the Iraq War, 9/11. And they're like, wow, you guys are very conditioning. It's amazing here. And I think Cubans probably were like, oh, the United States is so evil. They come to Miami, like, sweet! Like,
Yeah.
amazing here! So, a lot of the joke that Peace Corps made about Miami, the great thing about Miami is it's so close to the United States. Anyways, it's almost offensive. That joke is like this close to being offensive, which makes it my favorite kind
It's
of
because
joke.
we're in Tampa. So.
Right. So this is one of my favorite artists, because of course I work a lot with bamboo, and he dies very early. Sadly, he dies of cancer, so he just kind of disappears for health reasons. But his work is really wonderful and kind of natural. Jose Marti, I think this is one of his strongest works. The martyr. He's also like a Che Guevara figure, Jesus Christ-like figure, a martyr, fighting for what he believes and dying, and kind of San Sebastian references, the fleur-de-lis kind of arrows hitting him. Also kind of like a plague reference, but of course the machete is a very interesting thing because it's not just a tool of oppression, it's also a tool of liberation. So you take this tool that you cut my sugar for me, no, I'm gonna cut off the plantation owner's head. So, it's really, I think, a very powerful piece here, and, Jose Marti is definitely a bridge to kind of Latin America and the United States, that triangle between Spain and Mexico or Cuba and New York or Tampa. Not a triangle, I know. More like isosceles or whatever, but yeah. But yeah, I think Jose Marti is really a compelling figure in Cuban history, more than Fidel Castro. I don't think Fidel Castro, unfortunately, for him will be loved very much long after in the future. But yeah, so a lot of really wonderful work by this artist, Padilla. And he, like I said, he died of leukemia at the age of 32, very sadly. And some of these other artists, but I think what you see is it's all very kind of dreamy or conceptual or kind of focused on formal, but surprisingly not propagandistic. And I think that really just goes to show they're trying to avoid politics at all costs. There's a lot of place for politics in Cuba in film, poster art, elsewhere, so I think they kind of understand that and I think the government at this point realizes, okay, we need to let artists have a little bit of kind of room for, exploring things as long as they don't, do something too anti-government. So that's why I think the strategy here is kind of be within the revolution. And I think this is probably the one that most people know. He's very visible on social media. Tomas Sanchez, he's very successful. He lives in the United States now. And his work is very kind of spiritual, and I think it kind of addresses this religious question in Cuba because, within the revolution, outside, he's very far away from the revolution here. And these are like two people meditating, facing each other in this kind of pristine, kind of almost like,
I see one person.
what's Garden of Eden? What's that?
There's the
Outside
shadow,
the
and then
water.
across the lake, there's
Yeah,
another
there's two
person.
people.
Oh, I couldn't see that. Oh, okay.
Kind of looking at cross at each other. And for me, it's very much like, that all you need is love, like kind of a moment removed from society and nature,
Unless it's a,
What's that?
I just said it looked cathedral-like.
It's what?
Yeah, it was a kind of
Cathedral.
cathedral.
Yeah, cathedral, and
It
that
could be like
arch.
a reflective
yeah,
surface
absolutely.
even too, and just be like a reflection of the one person.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And it comes from, of course, this tradition of landscape painting, but it's like a surrealist landscape because it's really not an observed landscape, it's a
I like that.
conceptual landscape, right? And I think this is, he will be very well remembered as someone who's kind of addressing the revolution in that very kind of clever, in a very clever way. Because you can't really look at this and say, oh, that's anti-revolutionary, you know, you can only say that's kind of this beautiful moment of reflection and isolation, but you better be thinking about Fidel, you better be thinking about, you know, are you being a good revolutionary kind of thing. And it's very interesting to think about, you know, nature as part of, you know, communism, you know, cutting down trees for the people, or is nature, you know, where is nature in the socialist, you know, in Christianity it's very like Garden of Eden, we have a very kind of interesting relationship with nature. It's not at all kind of just like a resource to be destroyed. I'm thinking like Mordor versus Gondor.
Do you have his crucifixion?
Oh yeah, that's a more recent one. He's been doing stuff with
Yeah.
trash.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's a crucifixion.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think you can really see that it confirms that he's kind of interested in religion.
Oh,
So
yeah.
when I was in Cuba in the 90s, I met a bunch of Cuban artists or Cuban photographers who did a lot of like New Agey stuff. And it was so interesting because you realize New Agey stuff is one thing in the United States, but in Cuba it's like a form of like expression and getting away from kind of socialism. So they were really hungry for any New Agey stuff. And I think he likewise is someone who understood that in the New Age is kind of a non-religious kind of spiritual setting where you can kind of have some kind of communal experience with nature that's separate from the revolution. So I really think that's what he's doing. He's kind of trying to do kind of something like this, with kind of removing you from the revolution and offering this kind of natural, innocent state of grace and reflection. And you know, you can also see this as what's he looking at? He's looking at Florida. You know, a body of water as a kind of huge political gulf, literally. But you can also say like the human, when I see water, I'm like, well, we are water, and water, the passage of water is like the passage of the Spirit, and you are the way we move with water inside is kind of a wonderful metaphor for like, you know, the human journey in life, navigating through maybe politics, so kind of having a sense of direction, you know, it's very minimalist but meaningful. A cenote is like a sinkhole, and very common in Latin America. Maybe, you know, we have sinkholes here, but I don't think they have that spiritual resonance you see in Central America. It's kind of a sacred portal to the underworld. And I think you really see like kind of he's like outside the revolution. He's really not at all making any reference to Cuba except that the natural landscape, kind of the pristine landscape it's in the tradition of landscape. So he's kind of using landscape paintings to kind of offer a kind of conceptual critique of Cuba, of the system, by just not having the system at all.
I just find it interesting or odd that they make a point in putting somebody, small as it may be, in the picture.
Yeah.
And nature so overwhelmingly large, but they have a need to put a person in that picture, but
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
the
It's-
insignificance
you-
of the human.
Yeah, I think the huge size is a really good observation because you kind of overlook, you don't think about that necessarily, but yeah, I think he's really trying to make, it's not a small church, it's a cathedral. So you feel like kind of, and I think maybe my interpretation of that is like, there's something bigger than socialism that humbles us kind of thing. At least that's just one, you know, there's nature gives us where we can be humbled by nature without it being kind of like we're big brothers watching us kind of thing, or there's a kind of peace in that connection to nature, and that huge size is maybe part of the kind of the nourishing quality of nature, just the beauty of it. There's something, you're not claustrophobic, you're
Well, it's big and it's huge, but it's not threatening.
it's not like dangerous jungle.
It's very peaceful.
Yeah, and I think it's really kind of getting away from the politics, getting away from, you know, it's interesting too, because you know, you don't really see people didn't have smartphones back then, and even today, I think in Cuba, only kind of, well, now more and more people have smartphones. You got to wonder kind of what would be our equivalent today of going out to nature, but I'm thinking like someone would take a photograph of them out.
Yeah, a selfie.
And then it's now it's no longer in nature, now you're just like on social media.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really is. I think his work is really, and like you said, if you look at his more recent work, there's a lot more evolution.
I just think it's amazing, because we, being human, so much of our attention is on us and making us grander. And this
Making-
form us grander.
Yeah, okay.
But in this, it's making a point that
Okay, yeah, so
humans
kind of
play a
making
very
humans so big.
small role in things in actuality.
Yeah, no, I
It's
think that's
not
really neat.
a concept humans have much.
Yeah, and I think humility is so important for helping you kind of get a bird's eye view of your problems and not, yeah, really, I think that's what kind of Jesus is, kind of like a bird's eye view of kind of like your hope, like you were saying. You know, it's interesting to this one, because once I get the little egret, it kind of takes it away from the conceptual, so you do have the figure there, kind of over there, but it's so interesting, because the egret can be kind of
It draws
changes
the
it.
eye.
It breaks the fourth wall, or removes it from this conceptual landscape to being kind of like a picture of a guy meditating. So it is interesting, just what the little addition of an animal does to the picture. But now I think we have one without anyone in it whatsoever. So I think maybe, this is either like, square one, or it's just kind of like nature without a person. And yet maybe we're looking out across. Maybe the point of view is our point of view looking out. Maybe it's him looking from Florida at Cuba kind of thing, and notice he's no longer there. This is an island, and now and one person there, so they're very isolated. So it's kind of like, mis compañeros, my neighbors, Antonio Itis, these are neighbors, but they're very far away from each other. Yeah, it's so interesting. What a great use of kind of landscape painting and conceptualizing landscape. And that's kind of what we saw with Fredo Lam last week, turning the jungle, reinventing the jungle as a place of spiritual worship. And there they were walking. And you could also say, there's a reading of this, it's like, that's Fidel Castro walking through the jungle. You could say that's the origins of Cuban Revolution, is being in nature. And so you could say we're going back to the jungle and saying, okay, where we are in that kind of origin state, kind of like Jesus going into kind of like on his walkabout, right? Where he's kind of sees the burning bush and stuff like that. Isn't that kind of
No,
Jesus?
not Jesus.
Yep.
No. Jesus is not burning bush.
What not burning bush? What was it?
Well, Jesus was in the wilderness.
Well, he's in the wilderness,
In
right?
the wilderness.
Yeah. Okay. So
Burning
it's
bush
that.
is Moses.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Moses in the bush.
We got you. We got you.
You get the idea. Yeah. So I think Tomas Sanchez is really he's someone
It's
who
dreamy. It's dreamy.
yeah, it's
It's
dreamy.
just dreamy. I want to look at it. I want to be there.
Yeah, and there's something kind of liberating about this kind of transforming into the waterfall. It's like a transformation of the fall. You become the waterfall.
It's giving
You
this sense of oneness, like just.
Yeah, it's evocative of really lovely feelings.
yeah, and just imagine how much time it takes to make these.
Oh, his
paintings.
technique is crazy. I mean,
no, the technique
this is, I mean,
it's
the
photograph
the
level
detail.
Yeah, and I love this because I think if I were like a kid who's like 16, it would be so easy to be like, oh, why make anything? Because AI can make it so much easier. But then you look at this, you're like, this guy put a hand on every leaf and everything, and you realize there's something value to dedicating that time and attention span to something, because that there's something underlying it that's guiding all that perseverance, and I think that's really a valuable message for young people who probably are just like, oh, the computer can do it better than I can do it anyway. So, but yeah, I think it's let's say it's a little bit more. So yeah, he leaves Cuba in 1990. So it's so sad. This whole generation of artists basically kind of left. They left. I'm trying to think of a precedent for that, but I can't really think of it. Soto, Lorca, they all leave. So here's the aluminum room. There they
They
are.
weren't appreciated there, I mean.
Well, yeah, I think they were.
They
So
were appreciated,
so,
or what was that?
I think it has more. So they actually were appreciated. At this point, the government realizes, okay, we need to give the artists galleries. They start the biennial, the Havana Biennial, which is like an alternative to the Venice Biennial. That's the annual, semi-biennial art festival. They now have one in Miami now, the Art Basel. But Cuba realized, we need to offer artists as a measurement of the value of the socialist revolution, because the Cold War hadn't ended yet. Cold War ends in 1992, around then, Glasnost, Perestroika. So up until the late 80s, the Cuban Revolution still was fighting that Cold War battle to show, look at our artists are worthy. And that's really what we've seen, these artists who are kind of given this. And now into the 90s, these artists who do stay in Cuba, they can benefit from the fact that then they can travel to China or travel to the United States and buy art supplies and go back to Cuba. Like this one artist, Mabel Poblet, she spoke at the University of Tampa a few months ago. She's very talented, but you look at her work, you're like, none of these art supplies, you could never buy any of them in Cuba. And she drives around a PT Cruiser in Havana, and part of me just wants to like, I know, like, what are you doing? Like, don't you realize this? It's not like, and I don't get me wrong, I think it's great. I would never judge an American artist for driving around a PT Cruiser, but it's different in Cuba, of course. And so it's fascinating to think like, you know, you hold them to the same standard as any other artist from a different part of the world. And so Cuban artists who stay in Cuba, they can benefit from maybe being able to travel more than your typical Cuban, but if they have to come back to Cuba, if they stay in Miami, they lose all that. And a lot of these artists, with a few exceptions, realize that once they come to the United States, they're no longer interesting, because they're no longer these kind of prisoner artists of Cuba. So you kind of better off staying in Cuba, because then you're still seen as like, oh, you are the kind of marginal, or at least that's how it's seen, it's like the artist who's kind of in a different state. And Cuban art was very hot. You know, Ry Cooder and the Buena Vista Social Club back 20, 30 years ago. And then the Brothers to the Rescue and all that stuff happened, or maybe that was a little before that, but 9/11 happened and Cuba's kind of lost a lot of its credibility, or at least its political clout. You know, Florida's not a swing state anymore, no more Elian Gonzalez, so Cuba doesn't really dictate presidential elections. But when I look at this period, it's like a lot of conceptual art that feels very safe and not political. I think that's great because they all really learned from the Antonia Itis example. Don't do what she did. And just, I guess maybe a final note, I'll just show you this brief little kind of video about her and what she did. You might not be able to hear too much. So this is her being honored finally in the late 80s. 1980s.
Very, very 80s.
La importancia que ella tiene, me parece que no es del 60 ni del 70.
So basically the importance, that's what I'm talking about, the importance that she has. So just talking about her work, the importance of her work. And it's great that they finally honored her, they put this whole exhibit of her work together.
Impresionada,
Impressionable.
movida hasta el fondo de mi alma por la
Moved to the depths of my spirit, my soul, by her work. So it's kind of a retrospective of her work in 1988, but this is after several decades of basically being sidelined. So this is, speaking to what we were asking about, are Cuban artists celebrated yet? A little too late. And now keep in mind though, this is like the calm before the storm, because right after this the Soviet Union collapses, and then Cuba is left without any support from the Soviet Union, and that's why you have the Balsero crisis and all these Cubans coming to the United States. If you step on land in Cuba, in the United States, you basically become an American citizen. And a lot of other immigrants from Latin America do not like Cubans because they get a $1,000 check when they come to the United States, and welcome to the United States, you're now automatically a citizen. But that's because we treat Cuba as like a place where we need to liberate, rescue them from a system. Whereas if you're in Mexico, there's no like, oh, you need to escape from a socialist system. So there's a kind of, we're still kind of got that Cold War policy with Cuba. But I think, maybe next summer, if there's a chance to kind of figure out a way to make it a little more Christian related with Cuba, it's hard, of course. But maybe next summer I'll try to figure out a way to add some kind of more Cuban element to the lectures. But what I think is interesting with the Mexico case is all the artists we saw from Mexico came to the United States and made some of their best work in the United States, and they kind of focus on this Christian subject matter as a bridge to the United States. And I think as long as Mexico can deal with the cartels, you're going to hear a lot more about the United States and Mexico having a really great relationship, economic prosperity in Mexico, and that window of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera and these other artists kind of coming to the United States as fish out of water, whatever it is, and kind of commenting and benefiting from being in the United States. Each of them, I think, in spite of their disdain to the United States or loathing, they each kind of like were wowed and really, I think, transformed because they had this moment of visiting the United States and kind of, crossing those boundaries and cross-pollination. I think it's one of the more interesting stories of the 20th century, the way these Mexican artists came to the United States and kind of offer this like Alexis de Tocqueville commentary on the United States in mural form. And I think what makes Mexico and Cuba and the United States so unique is we're so close together. We really have this kind of inevitable, I think, cultural kind of blending that's going to take place. And of course, Catholicism and Christianity are, I think, obviously the same thing. I think I think enrich the United States to have more of that Catholicism. And maybe next summer I'll talk more about Chicano art. But I really hope it's been an interesting chance to talk about Mexico and the United States. And I'm really grateful for you guys being here, and thank you for sharing. And yeah, hope you guys have a great summer and all that.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.